Hey, this is Brent Ingersoll, and you are listening to the Speaking of podcast. In today's episode, we are sitting down with a person that is just a real hero to me. I've got several episodes coming out where I sit down with people who have just meant the world to me, people who have influenced me, poured into my life, been models, and just real heroes of mine. And today I sit down with Dr. H.C. Wilson. He is a leader who I have just admired both up close and from afar. My entire life, he has led at a variety of levels in the local church and in the denomination that I'm a part of, the Wesleyan Church. And he has just lived an exemplary life. And I just am so thrilled to be able to sit down with him, pick his brain on everything from life and leadership and faith. It's just a great thing to be able to sit down with your hero. I enjoyed this conversation. I really hope you do as well. This is my conversation with Dr. H.C. Wilson. So welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Have you, talk about, we made a joke there earlier about would you have imagined, when we were down in the recording studio, and I was thinking, you've seen a lot of different changes in your life, and ministries look different for you in different places in the world at different times. But would you imagine sitting in a little tiny corner with a couple microphones and headphones on, this going out to a...
Obviously, I would not have. I grew up in a ministry environment where the word podcast didn't exist.
That's yeah.
If you'd looked it up in the dictionary, it would have just...
It was a new word now.
A whole new word.
Yeah.
It's a whole new world. It's a whole new idea.
Yep.
I think it's very cool, but it's very different.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a ministry world where podcasts didn't exist, so that shows you how much
transgenerational issue.
Absolutely. So I wanted to I thought it'd be so fun to sit down and I've admired you from afar as a kid, and then in the last probably 15 years as I've been in ministry, I've been able to work alongside you and get to know you here and there. Have some conversations, some cool ones. I remember one in an airport in Washington. I think we were waiting in a layover, and just. Again, I'll always remember these conversations, but I thought it'd be neat to just have more of it's not formal, it's informal, it's a podcast, but more of just a chance to pick your brain, ask you some questions. And, one thing I wanted to just jump right into was, I've heard you reference your story enough times, but I've not actually heard your story. Like I know that you've served in church leadership for the, half a century or more. That's close. That's close. Yeah. But I've heard you refer though to the fact that you were in banking beforehand, and I actually want to know what possessed a person to change from a career in banking to go into ministry. Like, what was that shift? Because you'd already set out on one path, and how did that come about?
Well, actually, I set out on a path for the ministry first.
Okay.
I felt like I was called to the ministry when I was in high school. But I worked for a bank, a trust company actually in Moncton, a couple of summers while I was in high school and then college as a part-time job.
Okay.
And that kind of lit a little bite in me about maybe I like this finance world pretty good, maybe.
Yeah.
So but I had gone to 1 year of Bible college training, and the guy at the bank, the manager dude, called me on the phone and said, "Would you like to come back to work for us this summer? And if you'll come full time, we'll double the salary we were paying you last year."
Oh, wow.
But you'd have to say, "I'm staying on in the fall."
Right.
So I made an immature and unwise decision and decided I'd sooner be rich than righteous.
Yeah.
And so I said, sure, I'm on my way.
Yeah.
So that's what I did, and I worked there for 6 years.
Wow.
And did well. I traveled across the country in every province of the country on their inspection staff and had quite a little promising career there.
Yeah.
And enjoyed it. But I never got away from this underlying, maybe nag is not the best word, but an underlying gnawing at my spirit that I really should be doing something different.
Right.
One of the things in that whole process that when I began to seriously wrestle with the fact, this was about 6 years into my job with the trust company, up at Beulah actually on a Sunday night, I was struggling with this call to the ministry thing. Am I going to go back to that or am I not?
Right.
What's the deal here? And because I had done well enough in the other job that I had traveled in every province of the country as a part of a traveling inspection team, I was bitten by the travel bug.
Okay.
So one of the things that the enemy held over my head when I was doing this grappling with what should I do is that if you decide to win the ministry, young man, you'll never be outside the woods in New Brunswick.
Right. You're going to give all that up.
You're going to give all that up to do this deal.
Wow.
Anyhow, that's what I ultimately did, however, is give up all this stuff and go into the ministry, which I did, and pastored 2 churches, one for 3 years and one for 6.
Okay.
And then in the minds of some, Brent, I left the ministry and went into church leadership administration.
Yeah.
Some people thought that.
Sure.
More than once I was asked, when are you going to go back in the ministry? Which meant go take a church.
Yeah.
That's what that meant.
And for those listening that aren't familiar with who you are, you were a key player in leading the denomination that we're part of, the Wesleyan Church. And people maybe not seeing that as the same thing as being in a pastorate.
No, it seemed different to them somehow. But in the process of that, however, those experiences I had with the denomination and its mission agency and so on proved again what the Bible says, that the devil is a liar,
right,
and the father of lies.
Yeah.
During that time, when the devil had said to me, "You'll never travel again," since then I've been in 103 countries.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the old
that was
red
your
legs,
job,
that was my job.
Yeah.
So old red legs kind of proved again that it wasn't the thing. And so I was in administration quite a long time, but I don't like that word very much.
Yeah. Well, it's leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was in the leadership piece for quite a long time at a number of levels in the denomination, saw a lot of the world, tried to make a difference.
It's too bad that we live in a time, where administration is a bad word, the Trump administration, it doesn't,
that's an example.
or the Trudeau administration, whatever one you want to pick. But it's actually a gift of the Spirit, it's one of the gifts that I think Paul outlines as the gift of administration. And
well, you and I didn't just walk in here this morning and sit down in this studio, and all of this stuff had mysteriously appeared from somewhere.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
There was administration behind that we bought this and we bought that and we put it together, and here we are now utilizing it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it can be good, although some people hide behind it.
Yes.
Some people hide behind it.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of my life doing that.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's interesting, I think about you're telling me that, you were at Bible college sort of pursuing that track, and then this opportunity came. And it's funny, you see a couple things at work. On the one hand, you could say, and I think we've all maybe seen this in our lives where, it's like God, sometimes, I don't know if it's God, it's definitely God allowing this to happen, but it's almost like maybe the devil can give us an enticing distraction maybe to pull us off of what God was beginning to do. And yet God lets us, God's so gracious in how he leads us that sometimes he'll let us go do that. And then, I see that happen in your life where, you go into this administration thing, and on the one hand you say, well, was that stepping off? Was that an immature decision? But on the other hand, you say, well, look how God used that though to prepare you to be able to have those the gifts of administration, at a certain and that banking background. I mean, I've been in a room before where it's evident that has been a tool in the tool bag for your leadership. And so it's just interesting to think about how, and I think sometimes we get so, I don't know what the word is, twisted up about with the God's will. And, if I do this, is it in step with God's will? And I think one of the interesting things I think about your life is you've actually helped, probably hundreds or more than that, actually help discern whether it's a call to ministry or the mission field or that kind of thing. Like what do you, when you think about discerning the will of God in your life, like how do you process that? How do you help others process, taking those steps to follow, I find with God's will, it can be mysterious, and you can make an argument whether is this God or is this the devil trying to, or yes.
Well, when I was working with the trust company those years, there was a time when I shifted back to the ministry where I should have been from the start in a way. Those years looked like wasted years.
Right.
But you've alluded to this already. I learned things from the school of hard knocks, as they say.
Yeah.
And being involved with business people who didn't have a Christian orientation necessarily.
Right.
I learned things there that were of invaluable service to me and others when I was in positions to give advice and counsel. I'd been down a road. Most people who go to Bible school and then go to seminary or some combination like that and end up in the ministry, the only thing they've taken about basic finances is the one course that might be required.
Right.
Like they're just kind of a
like
drift.
me.
Yeah, they don't know a debit from a credit, hardly.
I took one course, and you taught it.
There, see. So, well, so look, everybody look around at King's Church.
Yeah.
If you want to get...
Yeah, don't talk to our CFO before he got here.
Yeah. So anyway, that was sort of an interesting thing to it. But with discerning the will of God, my mother was a godly woman. She was not an educated person at all, and she had an interesting concept on the will of God. I haven't decided whether I embrace it totally or not.
Yeah.
But her concept was the dot versus the corral.
Okay.
That was her deal.
Yeah. What's that mean?
That means there's a big corral out here that's God's will for you, and includes such things as you coming to Christ, and you being called to the ministry and raising up a godly family, though, like that big corral that takes in.
Yeah.
But the dot was, where does God want you at this minute?
Yeah. Right.
Like narrow that right down to the center.
Yeah.
She was a strong believer that God has a dot in the center for everybody's life.
Okay. Yeah.
And we need God's help to find out what that is. It isn't about, are you a believer? It doesn't mean that if you don't find the dot, you're going to go to hell when you die or something like that. It just means you are outside of what she used to call the perfect will of God.
Yes.
The perfect will of God was the dot.
Yeah. Wow.
And so often when people were seeking to find or asking counsel about that, I would try to get into a discussion about, if you could look 20 years ahead from now, what do you think God's Spirit might be stirring in you? What do you feel? To try to determine whether there was any sense of an actual objective, so maybe not the best word, but an objective out there somewhere that, I'd like to be a missionary in Zambia or whatever it might be.
Right.
Or as opposed to saying, I just want to do good for my fellow man.
Right.
Like, was there something, had a little more sense of a dot to it? I had a guy come to me one time in South Africa when I was there. He was there visiting and came to me and just flat out said, I believe God wants me to be a missionary to South Africa. What do I have to do to get from what I'm doing now to get there?
Yeah.
Like he had that,
that specific.
And he ended up doing that over time. We got that together. So, but she was a dot versus the big corral thing, meaning out here in the corral, you could be doing things that please God.
Yeah.
She would hold the view that if you left King's Church today and went to some other church, some other place, you haven't violated God's law. You're still a part of his family, and you're good to go. But are you in the dot where you should be?
That's such a helpful, I've never thought of it that way, but you think about God's general will for us is, I think, very generous and broad. And I've noticed more than once in my life a very keen sense of awareness where it's like, I don't know if God desired me to be in this place, but there's almost that like, well, here we are now. So let's make the most of it. It's like I find God very generous with his children and with all of us. I think that's in his nature. But I think that having that, because I think that's where we get lost, is we sense that general, it doesn't, on the one hand, I don't want to use the word, it doesn't really matter what we do. It does. But God's very, very generous with...
Well, one of the traits of that generosity you're talking about, the scripture says, it's God's will that all men be saved.
Right, right.
Okay? All men meaning all people, of course.
Yeah.
So that's the generosity of it. You get inside the corral.
Right.
Because we hold I do at least a theological perspective. The gospel is available to everybody who accepts Christ.
Yeah, me too.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the generosity piece. Mm-hmm. That's open to anybody.
Right.
But then some of the more particular gifts of the Spirit and ministry and other things, they narrow down toward the dot.
Yeah.
And
and that might be a good analogy just for what like maturity is learning how to dial in that, like, to focus your followership, so to speak, of how he's leading you. Because I remember, I don't know why this is coming to mind, but when you were sharing that, I was remembering you telling me, I think it was we sat on a committee when we were talking about membership and how, at some level when you follow the Lord, everything's not as nice and neat and tidy as you want it to be, and there's nuance in following him, and sometimes you have to take the sort of the scope of it all to know, like I think it's in Romans where Paul says, like, you'll know his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Like that sometimes it takes a whole sum of factors to figure those things out. I remember you talking about, I think, a particular situation in Africa that you were sort of presiding over, where there's a gentleman in a monogamous relationship. He comes to, polygamous. Yeah. He had multiple wives.
Yes.
And now he's a Christian.
Yeah.
And like, do you divorce one? So like in the complexity of that. And I think that corral and the dot sort of helps. Generally speaking, we believe divorce is a very bad thing. Like it's destructive. However, specifically in this situation, there might be some other factors to think through, even what would happen. I think you were mentioning something that like the complexity of that situation with the spouse that got divorced. Like,
well, to see what would happen there in that particular culture.
Yeah.
That particular culture, which would be tribal,
right.
South African, right?
Yeah.
A man having 3 wives is a common thing. It's not frowned on in any way.
Right.
It's a part of the general culture. So this guy becomes a believer, and then if you take the narrowest view of all that kind of stuff, he needs to get rid of 2 of these 3 wives he had and keep 1.
Right.
Except you make the sin, if you want to call it, that you make it more grievous by doing that.
Yes.
The women cannot return to their family's home. It's considered an insult or shame to the family.
Yeah.
And so they are left to make their living by being on the street.
Right.
Well, that was going to make the whole situation, in our opinion, much worse. But it was very interesting from a well-refined conservative North American ministerial mindset.
Right.
I was chairing that meeting, or trying to.
Yeah.
In a good meeting, the meeting's in the hands of the chairman.
Yeah.
In a poor meeting, the chairman's in the hands of the meeting.
Right.
It was kind of like that. We had English and Zulu and Afrikaans.
Okay.
All being simultaneously used, and multiple
land.
translations. We're trying to sort this out. And
wow.
I think this is probably appropriate to say, but partway through that whole proceeding, we finally agreed, by the way, he could keep his 3 wives and stay as a member in good standing, but he could not take another.
Right. Yeah, that seems,
That's where we ended up, because otherwise it was going to make the sin, if you want to call it that, worse.
Yeah.
But partway through the discussion, a man stood up in perfect English, said to me, "Mr. Chairman, my name is Simon Umugazi." And he said, I am educated, I work for the Transnational government, and I was educated in America. And he said, what we are discussing here is simultaneous polygamy, a man with more than 1 wife at the same time.
Yeah.
Said, I was educated in America and went to many churches there, and my observation is that you folks practiced consecutive polygamy.
Ah, ooh.
He said, you don't have all your wives at once, you just have them one after the other.
Wow.
He said, I would just hold to you that is not a better model than the one that's being discussed this morning.
Wow. Mic drop. Sit down.
Oh, sat down.
Oh, wow.
I thought it was an interesting perspective, though, to hold, right?
Yeah. Well, that's such this is a cool conversation, because, you get thinking about the complexity of situations and learning how to follow Jesus through those things. On the one hand, we have to consult, like the heart of the law, so to speak. And yet, on the other hand, we can't trust our own hearts. They're very deceptive. And a lot of the time, what seems right, like it says in Proverbs, like what seems right to a man in its end leads to destruction. And I think if we look at, I'd love your take on, Western culture in 2020. I think feelings are a pretty major player in the God of this age.
Well, I was just going to kind of go to the cultural thing, because in the case of the illustration we just discussed, this is an overgeneralization that I cannot prove to be true, but I believe it's true. Every culture believes their culture is the one God prefers.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
No matter where you go in the world, they think our culture is the one that God best. So in that sense, everywhere you go that is different from where we have grown up and been a part of, then you have to suddenly, you have to contact or come in contact with the scriptures in the light of how that culture has interpreted them.
Right. Yes.
Some more conservative and some more liberal, but they all think it's the right position.
Right.
Always interesting ways to navigate. And North America, of course, swings back and forth all over the place.
Yes.
And we're in cultural upheaval now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly our friends to the south. I mean, there's cultural upheaval going on. So how do you find your way in that? How do you determine where should we be here? What wind is blowing now that won't be blowing next month?
Right.
And all of that.
Yeah. What do you think are helpful guidelines like in that? Because I think, my generation and my children's generation are going to have to learn, I think every generation, how to discern the will of God and follow Jesus. Like we're doing a series at the church right now where it's like we're asking the question, what does it look like to follow Jesus in 2020?
Yep.
You know, and like what for you, what are kind of the, hey, here's the non-negotiable. If I'm trying to formalize, an ethic, so to speak,
Yep.
here are the things that I'm considering primarily. Like what for you, what are those things?
Well, obviously, you go back to the very beginning. If you do not acknowledge Jesus as the only begotten Son of God, we don't really have a starting place to talk.
Yeah.
Right. We can have a conversation, all right, but in terms of a mutually shared value conversation, we have to have. That's the biggest rock in the jar.
And it's interesting how often the church is not acknowledging that rock. In certain discussions that are ongoing in the church. Like I've found myself in discussion with others about some philosophical or theological thing, and then realize actually we aren't coming from the same place, because I don't know if you're acknowledging Jesus as Lord or the Scripture as authoritative.
Well, see, there's the theological position called the scandal of particularity. The scandal that dares to say there's a particular way to peace with God. Not multiple ways, a particular way.
Right.
Right. In which, of course, is acknowledging that Jesus was the Son of God, and through him there is access to the Father. That scandal, so-called a particularity, if we don't have agreement, Brent, on that, then we don't really have much of a place to go in the discussion other than how can we keep from killing each other or something.
Yeah.
But in terms of trying to build an ongoing relationship, you can't do that. So in our shifting cultural sands, now we're hearing a lot of talk that there are many ways to God.
Right.
Not just a single way, and that scandal of particularity thing is becoming less and less popularly accepted,
Yes.
shall we say, right?
Yeah.
Even to the point of saying, how dare you be so narrow in your view
Right.
that you think only Jesus will lead you to God.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that going on, so to speak. So the conversation, an ongoing conversation with someone who's a serious seeker after faith, has to begin on the particular claims of Jesus, that he was the Son of God and the only way to God.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's a very hard pill for some people to, less popular than ever.
Yeah, and I think you do get opportunity when you get in these discussions, because I've had them with folks who have been part of our church or left the church over this reason or that, and a lot of them having to do with what are in their minds ideological issues like marriage, sexuality, gender, the kind of hot button stuff. And I consistently find, like, okay, we haven't both taken the same pill here, though, that says, like, okay, we're gonna submit to Jesus as Lord, and try to fill that in and what he would have us do, primarily based on what the Scriptures say. And I'm open to interpretation, but we need to keep that dialogue squarely in that arena. And I'm finding even now a consistent move from that biblical, exegetical conversation that's mutually submitted to Jesus as Lord, that those conversations end up over here in some sort of, I just think that, or, I think it's time that we embrace this, or, Jesus loved everybody, therefore, and it's interesting to see.
And what I believe has kind of become a watchword. Like, I don't mean me personally, just people in the general culture.
Yes.
What I believe is the truth.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether it's what you believe or not is irrelevant. You can have your own truth.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm going to have my truth.
Yeah.
That says God has 3 heads or whatever it says. But I'm going to have my own truth.
Yeah.
And of course, people want to challenge, is there such a thing as absolute truth? Does that absolute truth even exist, for goodness sakes?
Yeah. Which is a pretty crazy question to ask, right? Like, based on the definition of what truth is, like, I think that implies that there is truth, right? And it's interesting how it's not even a hidden ideology that truth is subjective. It's overt in the, you live your truth, tell your truth. We'll say things like that. And it's like, that's actually an inappropriate usage of the word true, because I'm not the truest of people. You know what I mean? Like, I've recognized inconsistencies in me, and it's just it's an interesting day to be following Jesus and bringing up kids and leading a church.
If you're in a group where there's marriages that are in difficulty,
mm-hmm.
and you say to a husband and wife who are not in agreement and they're going to split up, you say, may I have your version? What is your truth?
Right.
You'll discover that the truth from the one and the truth from the other, they don't even cross anywhere.
Right.
Right? So obviously they can't possibly be truth,
Yeah.
only as it is understood by them.
Right.
When you apply that rubric, however, to the divinity of Christ, you get into a pretty bad place.
Yeah.
Pretty early.
We start to create him in our own image.
Yep.
And I think it's something that we're all prone to do. I don't think it's easy to sit and point at ways that other people do that and then exempt ourselves that we don't do that. I think we've got to even come back to a place where we realize that's a bad thing. Like, I think that's what we're losing now, is that, there's almost like not just a permission to sort of recreate the faith and our theology, in how we see it or think it should be, but it's like it's actually promoted.
Well, when I was your age, back in that generation, back there somewhere, inside the narrowest view that groups like ours had, we didn't hold all of these, but some groups like us, they defined truth by the things you didn't do. It wasn't by the things you believed necessarily.
Yeah.
Right? Did you drink or smoke or go to chew tobacco or go to the show those
Yeah.
that do and all
Yeah.
that stuff? And so truth was judged by a long list
Right.
of irrelevant external behaviors.
Yeah.
And that's how truth was defined. And that needed to change drastically. That was suffocating the church.
So you lived through a time where the church had gone into legalism almost, like that they'd clamp down so hard on, we hold these things to be true, and if you don't,
then you're out.
Yeah.
Right?
And you saw that within denominations.
I
even.
did. Now, not so much here in
Yeah.
our area, but in some parts of our own denomination or others.
Yeah.
Extreme case, I know of a church camp meeting environment in the United States, not directly connected to us. But when women came on the campground, they had people at the gate to measure how far their skirt was above or below their knee.
Wow.
And that determined whether you get in or not. Now, the
Wow.
rumor was that the teenage boys all wanted that job. So
Yeah. Jumpins.
I don't think that part was true.
Yeah.
But the other thing was they had somehow, because if you get into that deep legalism stuff that's trying to define truth by your external behavior,
Yeah.
then it's a cycle that leads downward and there's no bottom in the hole. It's a
Yeah.
hole with no bottom in it.
Yeah.
So you can never be holy enough by the way you're behaving.
Yeah.
Right? And so fortunately we've come out of that, but now there's, of course, the overcorrection
Right.
thing to go way over here
Yeah.
until you must endorse and embrace everything coming down the pike.
From legalism to license.
Yeah, exactly.
Where nothing matters, and it's
And everybody thinks they're in the middle of the road, by the way.
right.
On the legalism license
Yeah.
thing,
I'm centered.
I'm centered and I'm balanced.
Yeah.
And by inference, you're not.
Well, and I wonder, it's I think, and you probably have found this in your life, but there are times where I think if you're following Jesus relationally, you're going to see times where you have maybe where he's course correcting you, coming back from the right or the left and bringing you more centered. I don't know that we're ever, bang on, but you come into a place of that's more centered. But in this, I'll tell you what, I'm in a time right now where, you, and this might be just even the age I'm at, where I'm closing in on 40, and you probably have lessons you could tell me about. Beware of how you think when you're in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s, and I'm sure those things would be true. And I'm starting to understand the heart that growing up with my grandparents, for instance. I mean, we come from the same sort of Reformed Baptist background, and I was handed, not explicitly. I don't think any of my pastors or my parents gave me religion, and yet I somehow interpreted, this is what it means to follow Jesus. You do these things and you don't do these things. And there had to be this revelation through my 20s and even early 30s of breaking out of maybe legalism and finding love, like a love relationship with God. And now though I'm at a zone where I've got kids. One's in middle school now, second year in middle school actually. Like I have a teenager, which is just wild. And I have a church that I care about, And I'm starting to understand a little bit more the heart behind the rules, so to speak, that originally somebody somewhere out of a heart of pursuit for God said, you know what, it'd be better if you didn't wear a skirt that went up above your knees.
Yep.
And here's why. And there was a heart behind that was actually in a pure place, that
It
God
was trying to be positive
Yes.
and protective both.
Yeah.
Like your grandparents, for example,
Yeah.
wanted to protect you from unnecessary danger
Yeah.
and wandering away from the faith if they could.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you're saying, the idea of some of these things, they were not evil
Yeah.
in any way when they started. They were protective, I think.
Yeah.
But then they become more protective.
Yeah.
And you add another layer of regulation onto the layer you had.
Yes.
After a while, people suffocate.
And you'd think we saw that happen in the Bible,
Yeah.
wouldn't
yeah,
you?
Exactly.
Well, and that's I mean, it's just incredible how we just repeat these cycles, because that's, by the time Jesus came, they had the Jews had laws upon laws upon laws,
Yep.
and they'd completely lost the heart of it, and they didn't even know it when it stood in front of them.
No, you were judged totally by are you keeping the law or not?
Yeah.
I mean, that was
That's
the
it.
whole deal right there.
Yeah, and I wonder if the question of our day, and I don't want to talk to you about 2020 here in a minute, but like, I wonder if one of the things that, I don't know if, I know we're not going to be the ones who got it right. Let's just not be, let's not go down that road. But I wonder if one of the things that God is inviting us to is to figure out what it looks like to have a lifestyle that follows Jesus, that, obeys the law, so to speak. Like, I do think it matters, what we do, and that there should be standards. So one of the words that's been on my heart this year is like, I feel like God wants to redraw some standards in the church and say, you know what, we're not going to watch that. And it's not okay that you say that. And it actually, devotion and showing up matters. Like those things that we've taken fences down that have let wolves in.
Well, and it's easy to deconstruct.
Yes, that's a good word. Yes.
It takes no courage to tear down a fence, but it takes a lot of courage and perhaps beyond wisdom
Yeah.
to rebuild fences where they ought to be.
Yeah.
Like the Wesleyan Church, we're not a big denomination in the relationship to many others, but we have a respectable presence
Yeah.
in over 100 countries in the world.
Mm-hmm.
All of those countries are allowed to have all kinds of freedom with how they govern themselves,
Yeah.
except we have a list of items still being worked on under the rubric, under the title of We Speak with One Voice.
Hmm.
And then there are some things that we are believing we should say. We should not practice these things. Let's say child abuse, for example.
Yeah.
No matter what your culture is, where you are,
Yeah.
we speak with one voice in saying you cannot honor Jesus
Yeah.
and destroy children.
Right.
Like you can't do that.
Yeah.
And you can't defend it because they've done it in your country for 500 years.
Yeah.
Same with beating your wife.
Yeah.
Like some of those kind of things. There's a short list that's being developed as we go on further, but basically wanting to say, if we're going to sit together around the same communion table, we need to be able to say, you and I agree on these basic
Yes.
core things. We're not going to agree on all this peripheral, dare I say,
Yeah.
junk out
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
but we are going to agree on these things are a common bond of brotherhood and sisterhood. These are things we agree on.
Yeah. And I wonder if, one of the tactics of the enemy, though, has been to try to move the line on what are essentials and what aren't, and that's I wrestle with that, back to the conversation around sexuality and marriage and gender. I've said it from our pulpit, like it'd be much easier if I could, build a biblical argument to go with the flow of how culture or how we even want it to be. But the reality is there comes a point where we have to take the word of God and say, here's what we believe it's saying. And I explicitly need to yield to that. And, but I do, to come full circle on that thought, I do think it's going to be, I hope that I can figure out a way as a church community to lead my kids, with guidelines like my parents did for me, and now that I'm older, I'm grateful that they made me go to church. I'm grateful that even when I played competitive basketball, they managed that tension. They said, you're not just always going to skip youth group and Sunday. Even in a time where when I was a teenager, that was becoming a rare thing. I'm glad for that, and I'm hoping that I can not just take what they've done, but even come a step forward as the church and as a Christian dad, where I don't just hand them a lifestyle, though. Like I hand them like that somehow, and that was never the intent of my grandparents or my parents. They never wanted to just hand me a lifestyle. They wanted to point me to a person. But I wonder if this is a season where the church is going to rediscover not just Jesus, but the lifestyle, like that, what it looks like to follow him, and that I guess to use the word holiness, it matters.
Well, and I have 4 grandchildren. 2 are in high school, 2 are in middle school.
Yeah.
And because I spent a lifetime in the ministry, they unwisely believe I have answers to all things, which I clearly do not. But they come to me quite often, Papa, they call me. Papa, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
What do you think about that? And those questions always center around behavioral things like we're talking about.
Yeah.
Where they're trying to find out where is a faith-based norm in this.
Yeah.
Like what kind of latitude is there and where should we be and all of that. So these kind of things are facing us in ways now, I think, more acute than when you were growing up or I was growing. The issues have shifted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're now having to try to parse out issues for which everybody thought they had a clear, crisp answer 25 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Now they're being reparsed.
Yeah. Well, I think this goes along that line, is the managing the tension and figuring out the nuance of, at some level, whether it's law or lifestyle articles, or even organizations, like because again you've worked for a denomination and you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes with that, and it's all of those things. There's very good things, and there's disadvantages to it as well, and you can see that at every scale, whether it's with the denomination. I see it even within our church. Like as an organization grows, you gain some things because it's larger, but you also lose some things. And but you've always been a guy who is pretty grounded in your history. You did, like you said, you traveled the world. You led all over the place. You had opportunity to, put roots down in Indiana or wherever you wanted, and yet you came back here. What is it about that? Like, I think one of the ways I'd describe you is loyal. And what is it that makes you, at the end of your, as you've retired 3 times, you live here. Like, what is it that's made you see the value of you've served a denomination, for better, for worse, for decades, and a region too here in Atlantic Canada. Like, what is it about like loyalty? And again, because I just want to get to a place in my life where I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because I get frustrated with something or that kind of thing. And what's guided you to be able to, Now
there's something about rootage.
Yes.
R-O-O-T-A-G-E.
Yep.
There's something about rootage.
Yeah.
I had the benefit, as you did, of growing up in a home that honored God.
Yep.
Parents that honored each other.
Mm-hmm.
Did the best they could to bring children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, to quote the book.
Right.
Right. So that's my background, and it goes back about 3 generations at least on both sides of my family. So that rootage thing was there, which has its own appeal as you get older.
Yeah.
There's something about that. It almost has a magnetic pull to it.
Yep.
That now, if I had been born into a family that was very different than the one where I was, I don't know whether I would have felt that or been pulled back, so to speak, here. But
regardless, it's there.
But it's there to the point that we lived in the United States for 20 years but never became citizens.
Wow. Yeah.
And there was no reason not to.
Yeah.
After 5 years, we met all the qualifications you needed to, and it would have been hyper convenient to have 2 passports.
Right.
And move back and forth across the border without having, but we didn't do that.
Yeah.
And part of it was interesting, Brent, to me, that part of the reason we didn't do it is our kids who were teenagers when we got to that point said, we're Canadians and that's all there is to it.
Wow.
We're glad to live here, but
Yeah.
we're Canadians. It wasn't anti-American. It
Yeah.
was pro-Canadian kind
Yeah.
of thing. So that rootage piece,
Yeah.
I think, was a part of it. And of course, which is all part of your family connections here and those other kind of things.
Right.
And I didn't look back on my upbringing or this circumstance around us. I didn't look back with a lot of painful memories and scarred tissue in my spirit
Yeah.
because of things that had happened there.
Yeah.
And so it just seemed normal,
Yeah.
maybe,
Yeah.
to come back home.
Yeah.
And so, for better or worse, here we are. I actually was born in this city, St. John.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
I'm really back home.
Yeah.
Which parenthetically, it does something to. I was born in the old St. John General Hospital. It was
Yep.
destroyed a few years ago.
Yeah. I think it's been
Quite a
15
while.
years
Yeah,
ago
quite
or
a while
something
ago.
like that now.
It's painful to your
Yeah,
psyche
20.
to outlive a hospital.
I bet you.
There's
yeah.
something about that.
I suspect so.
Seems really weird to
Yeah.
me.
Like you feel like you're on borrowed time now.
Something. But the rootage piece was
Yeah.
strong.
Yeah. What is it though? Like even speaking denominationally and organizationally, I mean, we've had some conversations about that. And, trying to find my way in, being grateful that I'm part of something bigger, but at the same time trying to figure out how to lead in a healthy way and in today. And, what advice would you give to, I think I'm growing in my rootedness and groundedness and seeing the value of that and seeing it as an asset instead of a setback. And yet I would say the generation coming behind me is even more aggressive in we don't need that. We don't need this. We don't and just back to the deconstruction word, there's probably a place for, I know there's a place for that, but the enemy loves to get in and destroy, not just deconstruct. And what advice, what counsel would you give a person like me or younger people who say, I don't need my parents' faith, I don't need the denomination, I don't need this or that? What's kept you?
Well, part of what's kept me, I think, is the acute awareness from observation. There are no perfect denominations. So if you're looking for a perfect one, don't leave this one to go to another one. You'll find out it's got warts too.
Or churches for that, local churches for that matter.
To go beyond that, there are no perfect independent churches either.
Yeah, exactly.
They all have their own limitations, often centered around the leader, which could be true with a denomination too.
Mm-hmm.
But so there are no perfect independent churches. Everyone needs to be submissive to someone, that whole piece.
Yeah.
But I do think denominations can be both empowering and frustrating in the nth degree. It's I hate to use the word crapshoot, but I mean, you're not exactly sure what you're going to get,
sure,
so to speak. But I would sooner contribute as best I can to help to develop and continue to see the development of a healthy organization that is continuing to grow and attracting young people and others, as opposed to saying, nope, think I'll run over here on my own. That happened enough. There are 400 and some denominations in the United States, for goodness sakes. Everybody had a better idea.
Right.
So find a common bond and try to develop it and nurture it and find out, are these people flexible? Are they making changes? Are they adapting to today? Are they married only to yesterday?
Yeah.
What are we?
So for you, and I understand this because I see it in a smaller scale at our church. You see the vehicle of a denomination, for instance, as something that it can't accomplish something that if we work it, it can work. Is it perfect? No. Can it get flat tires? Yes. It's the same. I've had conversations with people who've come on the board or come deep into leadership. It's okay, you're going to get to pop the hood on this thing, and you're going to find that there's some stuff that if you're not ready for it, it's going to take some maturity. You're going to realize that there's some things that we got to work on. Yeah, it's not perfect. And it's seeing the value, I think, of, or even the potential of what could happen if, like you said, if we have a healthy organization, we can really accomplish some stuff. And
for 5 years, I had the privilege of being the general director of the international ministry for the Wesleyan Church, all that overseas stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of good work being done in schools, hospitals, clinics, church planting, a lot of good stuff that could never happen by one church on its own, not ever.
Right.
Those things only became reality because
of the
people who viewed the Great Commission seriously said, who can we link up with and trust to do what we want done with our money
Right.
to help these things go forward, right?
Yeah.
So I became a stronger believer than I was before, I think, when I was in the missions thing, with the organized churches banded together on a common bond of understanding of the Great Commission.
Right.
And we're all supporting the same cause.
Yeah. It's hard, I think, because especially when you get in these international things and you get as a denomination, it gets very hard when you're on the ground in Atlantic Canada to see the value in, Swaziland or wherever, right?
And you could give all kinds of illustrations of that, right? But one that just pops into mind, I was in Guyana in South America when we dedicated a Bible in the Patamuna language for a tribal group that had never had a word of the Scripture in their language ever. Some people came by 5 days by canoe to be there. It touches me yet.
No doubt.
And when the time came, about 10 young men came in carrying boxes on their shoulders, each of which held 50 copies of the Bible. And the people were celebrating and praising the Lord and jumping up and down, grabbing the Bible and kissing this thing. And it had been done by a translation team that included a lifetime Wesleyan missionary, a Jesuit priest, and 2 translators that we had borrowed from Wycliffe.
Wow.
They'd come from the country next door, Suriname, and over. So here you had this group, a Catholic and a Wesleyan and a couple of Wycliffe dudes. Well, I don't know what their background was, Dutch Reformed likely. And these people celebrating a Bible. We got Bibles home with dust on them.
Yeah.
You have too, probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how could all of this have happened? Was somebody doing it on their own?
Yeah.
You couldn't do it on your own. And if this is, I must say this is probably dangerous maybe, but the Jesuit priest there, I really like this dude.
Yeah.
And by the way, the lady who was our missionary working on that project, she had grown up in a very conservative Wesleyan church in Ohio.
Okay.
She was about 65 then. She said, if my forebears knew I was working every day with a Jesuit priest, they'd disown me.
Yeah.
Anyhow, he come up to me and we had a nice chat. He was a British guy.
Yeah.
He said, my name is Paul Martin. I'm a Jesuit priest.
Wow.
He said, you once had a prime minister.
By
my name, he was not very good. That was not my comment.
Yeah, his. Yep. For the record.
For the record, it's not my comment.
Yeah.
But that was of which I could give many illustrations like that of the power of joining together to do a task that cannot be done alone.
Yeah, and I believe that, like the challenge is kind of keeping that big picture, the scope of it front and center. And then though, I think, and this is I'm feeling, it's funny, if you would have asked me 8-9 months ago, do you have a control problem when it comes to the church, I would have said nope, and then I lost some control, and so I feel like and this 2020 has exposed some angst in me that I didn't know was there, and specifically, and I had this thought a few weeks ago, if somebody were to follow me around for a few days and they could read my thoughts and they hear my conversations and they see what's troubling me or what I'm interested in or all that, and they had to do an audit of what is occupying Brent Ingersoll right now. I think they would say, or they would have said, and I'm working to make this not the case, but they would say, he's very concerned about saving the church. Like he just wants to make sure the church is okay through this and that we come out the other side okay. And the Lord checked my heart though on that, because on the one hand that seems like a good and noble thing that you would want a pastor who wants to care about his church. Sure. But I felt the Lord say, like, actually I'm not super interested in saving the church. I'm interested in spending it. And like what I'm after is saving the world, and you're the vehicle to do that. And if you're getting into this mode where your number one priority is to maintain the viability of your organization, you have put in a countdown clock on this thing. And and that to me is not just the fight of a denomination, but for a local church as well. And I think that's the thing that every leader and every pastor needs to wrestle down right now is, how is the Lord moving? And yes, this vehicle can accomplish great things, but are we working to use this and to literally use it, empty it out and pour it out on those moments like you had giving the Bible, like that's what this is for. And it's human nature that I think the Lord in his kindness to me has yet again revealed is deep within me to preserve and to save and to try to keep this thing how we have it. And that to me has been my dance with. I've been probably unfairly critical of the denomination for being guilty of that, because I haven't been pressed, in my own leadership of seeing that that's in me too. And it's like, and I think at every scale, we as leaders, especially leaders in the church, that's the fight, is like, can we use this thing and maximize it? And are we doing it to the ends that God is really, like the Great Commission ends? And it's funny how fast we can convince ourselves we are, but then a little trauma comes along and says, actually, what you care more about is that this is here next week,
I was at a meeting a couple of years ago when I was at the end of a national assignment I had with our church, invited to a meeting in Mississauga of leaders of evangelical denominations in Canada.
Yeah.
There were 18 of us there. I didn't know anybody in the room except 2 other people, and they were from all across the country. 17 men and 1 woman, by the way.
Wow.
It's interesting to me. She was a Salvation Army guy, or gal.
Yeah.
But we had visitors there with us who came to make presentations, which included the president of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, the president of the Canadian Council of Christian Charities, and the president of the Christian Legal Society of Canada.
Yeah.
I came away from that with 3 words that the guy from the Evangelical Fellowship gave us. He used them in a different context, and I think they apply today. I'm actually working up a talk on this, but he was talking about tension in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
It was back when Trinity Western in British Columbia was trying to get their law school approved by the folks in Ontario, and that wasn't going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. So it was in that whole thing of the culture turning against the church or tipping away from it.
Mm-hmm.
But his 3 words were prepare for winter.
Wow. When was this?
This was about 2 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
Prepare for winter.
Yep.
He meant these things like Trinity was fighting about.
Yep.
What you just described was preparing for winter.
Mm.
When things change in the winter,
Yep.
the warmth is gone in some way.
Yep.
There are good things can happen in winter.
Yep.
But prepare for winter, I think, is a shift in thinking. Like you just said, is God saying your task is not to preserve kings.
Yeah.
Your task is to do what you can to impact the kingdom.
Yeah.
Right, the broader, which is kind of a winter thought. Like the prepare for summer is be as big and glorious as we can.
Yeah.
Prepare for winter, it refines thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyhow, I'm working on that, but those words were impacting to me.
Did you catch that very early when the pandemic hit? Andy Crouch put out an article. I'll send it to you if you haven't seen it. But he talked about that this pandemic is going to be a winter or maybe even an ice age. That kind of thing.
I read that.
Yeah.
Which was much more current, but tied in with that earlier thought. Right.
Yeah.
He talked about the ice age. And, what are we in now exactly? And how long will this last? It was a very intriguing article.
And I think what this winter has exposed, though, in me is that, like, it's just showing some areas where we aren't as missional as we thought we were, or maybe we aren't as evangelistic as we thought we were. And I've even noticed as churches have tried to rally their people to come back to church. I get that, and I want to experience that. I can't wait for the day where we have worship like we can, or even better than we ever have. I think that'll happen. But there's something crying inside of me when I hear, leaders in churches just expending so much energy to try to get their people to come back and sit in a seat. And I'm just like, is that the goal? Like, is that the goal of the church, or are those seats actually meant to be something that, yes, is that the goal, or is that the means to the goal? Like, when you come into that seat and you get filled up and you get sent out, and it's just like, man, I feel like the Lord is really bringing refinement and defining, some of those things we might have gotten twisted. And I'm finding that in my own spirit right now, and trying to ask the Lord to reveal it and give me a heart, a posture that's both yielded and surrendered, but also full of hope of what we can accomplish. And man, it's a challenging time.
Yeah, I find myself trying to avoid, I think I'm doing okay with this, but I'm not sure, trying to avoid praying for things to be like they were.
Yeah. Yep.
Because there's a part of me, like we already said earlier, I want things like they were.
Yep.
But they may not have been serving the Great Commission the best.
That's right. Yep.
So I'm trying to discern somehow what does it mean to come out of this winter season when we do with doing things that were not the same.
Yep.
They're different in some way, maybe yet to be
Yep.
defined.
Yep.
7 months ago, Brent, 7 months ago, less than 7 months ago, COVID was the first, it hadn't touched the church at all.
Right.
15th of March was the day most churches quit services or thereabouts. And you may remember what was being said then was, we'll be back by Easter.
Yep. Yep. No one dreamed of this.
Nobody dreamed of this. So that's within the last 6 months. So one of the things, and I'm not in active leadership now, but one of the things I keep talking to God about every morning, if all of this could happen in 6 months and none of us saw it, what's next?
Yep. Yep.
What's the next 6 months going to bring that we may be unprepared for?
Yep.
And, you know, God helps to prepare for winter.
Yeah, and my hope is, and I do, there's been a shift. You know, it's funny, like even today, as we're recording this, you probably felt in the air, it's cool.
Yeah.
You know, you felt the shift in the air, like, ooh, fall's coming.
Yep.
You know, and you could feel it. And it's been a, I'll use this word, it's been a hell of a year to use that terminology. On multiple levels, not just the church, but some personal things and family things and organizational things. It's just been one thing after another. And, you know, I've battled this year a certain degree of just fighting despair and fatigue and all that. And I will say, though, I would say in the last 14 to 21 days or so, there's a shift inside of me where I feel, I don't know if it's permission to hope or if it's God depositing another measure of faith, but I feel like I just have this sense, like almost like the air is shifting. And will we be back to normal? I doubt it. I think, but I actually am starting to dare to believe that normal could be better than it was before. And I wonder if this crushing season is going to create something new. And, you know, there's a lot that I don't know. But I do have a sense that God is working towards reaching this world and bringing the kingdom here. And as long as we partner with that, we're going to be all right. And the other thing I've been thinking about, I'd love your take on this, is because you've seen it as you've served the denomination. You've seen the denomination form not just partnership, but friendship and alignment with other denominations that when you were my age even would never have even, you know, they were enemies almost. And I wonder if this isn't a time where, and it might not be in my lifetime where we're able to really call it this, but I wonder if this is a time where the Lord is bringing a unity in the church that has not existed since, you know, 500 AD, you know, that kind of thing, where you go through those big historic schisms, so to speak, and you go back to the Reformation where, I mean, it just fractured. And I would actually say for the better, like the Great Reformation and then all the denominations that spun off out of that. One of the things I've found, and you've probably found this too, I'd love to hear you on it, is, you know, the Baptists give us an angle on God that if they weren't there, we'd be missing something about the holiness of God and the sovereignty of God. Like, I wouldn't appreciate that if it wasn't for the John Pipers of the world. And the Pentecostals give a passion and a love for the fire and the power of God. And the Wesleyans, the Arminian, like all of these things have given us a fuller picture of who God is. And I wonder if God is not moving us to, you know, if 1500 AD was the Great Reformation, if this is going to be the Great Unification, where, and now, I mean, right now people are listening to us who knows where. Yeah. You have this global digital economy. You just wonder if that's not how the Spirit's moving today. And how do you see that?
I'm 75 years old. When I was growing up, this was done without malice, I believe. But when I was growing up, there was a lot of conversations about how we were different from other people.
Right.
Right. There's the foot washers over here, the brethren people, they
Yeah.
wash feet.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
The Pentecost, you can't understand them because they're babbling and
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Baptists, you can do whatever you want because you
Yeah.
know,
Well, you're always
all
saved.
of that.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of conversation about what keeps us apart, even some preaching about that,
Right.
right? Don't hear that anymore.
Yeah.
And it's become what you're saying, kind of there used to be an old gospel song that said, "You're my brother, so give me your hand."
Uh-huh.
That kind of idea, until we now talk much more about what holds us together
Yeah.
than what keeps us apart.
Yeah.
And so long as we don't give up on the scandal of particularity,
Yeah.
there's one way to God through Jesus. As long as that's an irreducible truth at our core, I think giving up all this other stuff is a very good thing.
Yeah.
And helps us a lot. And, you know, as a small example, I serve on the board of trustees of a small college not far from here that's owned by the Wesleyan Church, now has a Nazarene and a Pentecostal and others who
Right.
are actually on the board,
Yeah.
which would have been like
Never would've
drinking
happened.
strychnine back
Yeah.
20 years ago, right? It
Right.
just wouldn't have been, because we are dwelling on the thing. There's a lot that holds us together, and there are enough genuine forces of evil, if I may use that term,
Yes.
that are coming against the church, that those of us who are in the church need to join arms together and
Yeah.
say, we agree on what's really important. What can we do together?
Yeah.
And seeing a lot more of that.
It's interesting. I mean, maybe that's part of the grace of God in allowing the church to go through, whether it's the cultural wars or COVID or just the kind of the general global climate of the day, is, you know, it's like when a bigger hill to die on comes along, all of a sudden the molehills all of a sudden don't really matter all that much, and it's like maybe we don't have the luxury or the margin. You know, this probably is not politically correct to say, and might get me in trouble, but whatever. You know, I've always thought of like some of the banners and the fights that people pick these days, like that never happened in the 1940s, because there was a world war going on and you really didn't have the luxury. It's like the luxury of comfort has allowed some of these disagreements and these wars that we fight to exist. And you wonder if God brought a little pressure on the church to get us over maybe some of those.
I don't know whether this is a good analogy, because all illustrations fall apart if you push them too far.
Yeah.
Right? But we all know of multiple police reports about a husband and wife that are fighting, and you call the cops.
Yeah.
The cops show up. Now the husband and wife are together fighting the cop, more or
Right,
less.
right. They brought them
More or
together,
less
yes.
Brought them together.
Yeah.
Well, if you can imagine that the Christian church is like a couple, and we spent hundreds of years fighting each other
Yep.
about this or that or something else, and now a force has come against us that's challenging that. Now we're banding together
Right.
to fight against this force
Yes.
in a way, which I think is a good thing. The church always does better when the culture is negative toward it.
Yep. Yeah.
Like it brings it, you have a chance to measure what's important here anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So let's end with this. So what makes you hopeful? You know, you're in a different gear now.
Yeah.
You've left a legacy and roads for guys like me to follow. What makes you hopeful though when you look at the landscape of things? And even, I mean, we're still smack dab in the middle of a global pandemic.
We are.
You know.
I read the last chapter of the book.
There you go. Yeah.
And in a way sounds oversimplified,
Yeah.
but that's it. We're on the winning side. That doesn't mean you win every battle.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we don't have bad days ahead of us, which I do believe we do.
Yeah.
My daily scripture reading lately has been in Matthew, where many difficult things happen to the church.
Especially, yeah.
And were predicted to happen.
Yeah.
Again, right? So I get all that. And I don't mean to trivialize it, but when it's over and done,
Yeah.
we're part of the winning side.
Yeah.
Right? And nothing's going to take that away from us. It may surprise us, by the way,
Yeah.
who's there at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the people we wouldn't let in may be there.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a rejoicing day, and we're going to have the winning banner at the end. It only matters in an election race or any other kind of or a sports event.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who's ahead at the beginning or in the middle.
Yeah.
It matters who's ahead at the end.
Yeah.
And we're going to be ahead at the end.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
I agree. Well, we know how the story ends.
We do.
So, well, thanks, Dr. Wilson. This has been a real privilege and a treat, and we'll have to do it again.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, Brent.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with H.C. Wilson as much as I did. He is a real gift, not just to me and my life, but I believe to the kingdom of God. And it's been a real treat to talk to him. Hey, before you go, do me a favor, hit subscribe, leave a review, do whatever you can to help us get these messages out. I'd sure appreciate it. We'll see you next time.